My mother never told this story all at once. She shared it in fragments, broken sentences, always as if she were walking on shards of glass. Sometimes it was a quick comment, other times a silence too heavy to ignore. Whenever I insisted, she changed the subject. She said it was in the past, but there was something in her eyes that always told me otherwise. It never really passed. School was the place where my mother learned, far too early, that being poor was also a reason for shame. She was 13 years old when she started at that school. It was an ordinary public school, the kind you find in any small town, with high walls, a rusty iron gate, and classrooms too crowded for teachers who were already too tired. But to her, that place felt like a separate world, where the rules were different and cruelty was allowed to exist. At home, life was already hard. My grandmother woke up before sunrise to work. She left with a serious face, calloused hands, and a simple lunchbox. The money barely covered the basics. New clothes were a luxury. School supplies were counted one by one. There were no choices, only adaptation. My mother wore the same uniform almost every day. It was clean, always well washed. But it had lost its original color. The fabric was thin from so much use. Her sneakers had cracks on the sides. And when it rained, water seeped in and took hours to dry. She felt ashamed, but she had no alternative. On the first day of school, she tried to go unnoticed. She sat in the back of the classroom, near the window. She observed more than she spoke. She noticed the other students, the full pencil cases, the new backpacks, the cell phones, some already brought hidden in their bags. She also noticed the looks. It didn't take long for her to realize she was being watched. At first it was just whispers, little laughs when she walked by, eyes scanning her from head to toe. Nothing explicit, but everything intentional. She pretended not to notice. She told herself it was all in her head, that no one cared that much, but they did. As the weeks passed, the whispers gained voices. A comment here, another there, a shove by accident in the hallway, a piece of paper thrown onto her desk, a laugh too loud when she made a mistake. Reading out loud, "Speak up, we can't even hear that poor girl's voice," a boy said once. The class laughed. The teacher asked for silence, but didn't punish anyone. She simply continued the lesson, as if nothing had happened. My mother felt her face burn. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like everyone could hear it. That was when she learned that asking for help was useless. The nicknames began to appear. They didn't always come from the same people. Sometimes they came from classmates she barely even knew. It was as if humiliation were a collective sport. Beggar, stinky, mud feet. She went straight to the bathroom when she got home. She took long showers, scrubbing her skin hard, as if she could erase something that wasn't on the outside. She cried in silence, afraid my grandmother would notice. She didn't want to worry her. She didn't want to be another burden. But the worst day was still to come. It was a hot morning. The classroom fan barely worked. The students were restless. The teacher walked in with a stack of papers and announced she would collect the final assignment. She said everyone had to turn it in with a proper cover, neat and organized, just as she had asked weeks before. My mother felt her stomach drop. She had done the assignment. She had written everything by hand, carefully. She stayed up nights reviewing it, but she didn't have a cover. The one requested cost money. She tried to improvise with a simple sheet of paper, folded neat. When it was her turn, the teacher took the notebook, looked at it, frowned, and raised her arm, showing it to the entire class. "What is this?" she asked, in a mocking tone. "Teacher, that's the cover," my mother replied almost without a voice. "This is not a cover. This is neglect." Some students started laughing. Others looked on, curious, waiting for the next blow. Then came the sentence my mother never forgot, the sentence that still echoes in her mind to this day. "Those who can't afford to study should stay at home." The silence lasted half a second. Then the classroom exploded in laughter. My mother felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Her hands began to shake. Her face burned. Her chest tightened in a strange way, as if there wasn't enough air. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, to explain, but no words came out. The teacher slammed the notebook onto her desk. "Sit down. You'll get no grade." My mother couldn't answer. She stood up slowly, her legs weak, and walked out of the classroom. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't look back. In the hallway, the tears finally fell. She leaned against the wall, slid down, until she was sitting on the floor, and cried like she never had before. No one went after her. Not the teacher, not her classmates. No one. In that moment, something inside her broke. It wasn't just the shame. It was the feeling of not belonging, of not being welcome, of being wrong simply for existing the way she did. She stayed there until the bell rang. Then she washed her face in the bathroom, took a deep breath, and returned to the classroom as if nothing had happened. She learned another harsh lesson that day. The world doesn't stop because of your pain. From that day on, school stopped being a place of learning. It became a battlefield, and that 13-year-old girl began, without knowing it, to carry a wound that would follow her for many years. After that day, my mother never walked into that school the same way again. Something inside her had shifted, quietly but permanently. She still went to class every morning. She still wore the same uniform, carried the same worn backpack, followed the same routine. But inside, she had learned a dangerous lesson. Staying invisible was safer than being seen. She stopped sitting near the window. She moved to the very last desk, close to the wall, where fewer eyes would land on her. She avoided raising her hand, even when she knew the answer. She avoided speaking, even when she wanted to. Silence became her armor, and silence, she discovered, can be heavy. Every sound in that school seemed louder after the humiliation. The ringing bell felt like an alarm. Laughter echoed longer than it should. Footsteps in the hallway made her shoulders tense. She was always alert, always waiting for the next attack. The students noticed her withdrawal. Some were satisfied, others grew bored. A few became crueler. Humiliation doesn't always come as shouting or insults. Sometimes it comes as exclusion. Empty seats around you, group projects where no one wants you, conversations that stop the moment you approach. She learned what it felt like to exist in the same room and still be completely alone. At home, nothing changed on the surface. My grandmother still woke up before dawn, still left quietly, trying not to wake her daughter, still returned exhausted, smelling of work and sweat, asking the same questions every night. How was school? Fine, my mother always answered. One word, always the same. She didn't know how to explain the weight she carried. She didn't have the language for it yet. She only knew that if she spoke, she might break completely. So she swallowed everything, every insult, every look, every laugh. Her body began to respond to what her mouth refused to say. She started having headaches that came out of nowhere. Her stomach hurt for no clear reason. Some mornings, she felt nauseous before school. Her hands trembled when the teacher called her name. Sometimes her heart raced so fast, she thought something was wrong with it. She didn't know then that this was fear living inside her. One afternoon, during recess, she sat alone on a bench near the wall. She watched groups of students laughing, sharing food, trading stories. She felt like she was observing another species, something she didn't belong to. A girl from her class passed by and looked at her shoes. "Still wearing those?" she said, smirking. My mother lowered her head, said nothing. The girl laughed and walked away. Silence again. The teachers noticed her grades slipping. Not drastically at first, just enough to raise concern. She still tried. She still studied at night under weak light. She still did her homework carefully. But fear interfered with everything. Fear of making mistakes. Fear of being mocked. Fear of being noticed. One day, during a reading assignment, the teacher called her name. My mother froze. Her throat tightened. Her palms became wet. She stood up slowly, holding the book with shaking hands. When she began to read, her voice came out low, almost inaudible. "Speak louder," the teacher said. She tried. Her voice cracked. A boy laughed, then another. The words on the page blurred. Letters danced. Her mind went blank. She stopped reading. "Sit down," the teacher said impatiently. "If you don't prepare, you waste everyone's time." The class laughed again. That night, my mother locked herself in the bathroom and cried until her chest hurt. She pressed her hand over her mouth to keep the sound inside. She didn't want my grandmother to hear. She didn't want to explain something she didn't fully understand herself. She looked at her reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize the girl staring back. Her eyes looked tired, older than they should have been, empty. For the first time, a thought crossed her mind clearly. Maybe I really don't belong there. That thought scared her more than the insults. Because once you start believing what they say about you, the damage goes deeper. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The humiliation didn't stop, but it became routine. And routine pain can be even more dangerous than sudden cruelty. She stopped expecting kindness, stopped hoping things would change. She focused only on surviving the day. Then came the meeting. One morning, my grandmother was called to the school. She wore her simplest clothes. Her hands were rough from work. She sat in a small office across from the principal and one of the teachers. They spoke calmly, professionally, as if they were discussing a problem, not a child. Your daughter is not keeping up with the class, the principal said. She's very quiet, the teacher added. She doesn't participate. Maybe school is not the right environment for her, the principal concluded. My grandmother listened in silence. No one mentioned the insult. No one mentioned the humiliation. No one asked how my mother felt. They spoke as if failure were a personal flaw. At home that night, my grandmother tried to talk to her. Is something happening at school? She asked gently. My mother looked at her hands, at the floor, at the wall. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. Instead, she said, I'm just tired. And that was true. She was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. From that moment on, the idea of leaving school stopped being just a thought. It became a possibility, a temptation, a way out. She didn't want to be there anymore. Not in that place, not feeling that small. She was only 14 years old, and she already felt like she had failed at life. Leaving school did not happen all at once. It happened slowly, like something dying quietly so no one would notice. At first, my mother began missing days. She said she felt sick. Sometimes that was true. Other times she just couldn't make her legs move toward that building again. Each absence felt like both relief and guilt. Relief for escaping the pain, guilt for feeling like she was giving up. When she did go, the days felt longer than ever. The hallways seemed narrower. The classrooms felt colder. She stopped carrying books with care, stopped worrying about neat handwriting, stopped believing effort mattered. She was surviving, not learning. The students barely noticed her anymore. She had faded into the background, and in a strange way, that hurt even more. Being mocked was painful, but being invisible felt like confirmation that she didn't matter at all. One afternoon, while walking home alone, she stopped halfway and sat on the curb. She stared at the ground for a long time, listening to distant traffic and voices she didn't recognize. She felt empty. That was the first time she thought seriously about never going back. At home, the conversation finally happened. My grandmother noticed the changes, the silence, the tired eyes, the way my mother avoided talking about school altogether. One night, after dinner, she sat across from her and asked again, more firmly this time, tell me what's going on. My mother tried to speak. Her lips trembled. Tears filled her eyes before any words came out. When she finally spoke, it all came out at once, broken, rushed, incomplete. The names, the laughter, the teacher, the sentence that had destroyed her. My grandmother listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask questions right away. When my mother finished, there was a long silence. Then my grandmother reached across the table and held her hand. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know, but being sorry didn't fix the damage. The next week, my grandmother went back to the school. She spoke to the principal again. This time, her voice shook, not with fear, but with anger. She asked why no one had protected her daughter, why no one had noticed what was happening. The answers were vague, defensive, empty. Kids can be cruel. We can't control everything. She needs to be stronger, stronger. That word followed my mother for years. In the end, the decision was made quietly. No ceremony, no goodbye. My mother stopped going to school. She was 14 years old when her education ended. No one threw a farewell party. No teacher asked her to reconsider. No student noticed her absence. The world moved on as if she had never been there. And that
more than anything, confirmed what she already believed. She was disposable. She started working soon after, small jobs at first, cleaning houses, babysitting, running errands. She woke up early and came home exhausted. Her hands, once soft, began to roughen. Her back ached. Her childhood slipped away without permission. Sometimes she passed by the school on her way to work. She avoided looking at it, but occasionally her eyes betrayed her. She wondered if anyone inside remembered her name. They did. Years passed. The pain didn't disappear. It changed shape. It became something she carried quietly, like a scar under clothing. She learned how to smile without revealing what she felt. She learned how to endure. But there were nights when the memories came back without warning. The laughter, the classroom, the teacher's voice. She would lie awake staring at the ceiling, feeling 13 again. What hurt most wasn't just what they did to her. It was what it made her believe about herself, that she wasn't smart enough, that she wasn't worthy, that she didn't belong anywhere better. Still, somewhere deep inside, something refused to die completely. A small voice, weak but stubborn. This isn't all you are. She didn't know when that voice would grow stronger. She didn't know how, but it stayed with her, quiet, impatient, waiting for the right moment. And that moment would come. Not quickly, not easily, but inevitably. Life didn't change overnight. After my mother left school, there was no sudden miracle, no dramatic rescue. What happened was quieter, slower, and in many ways harder. She worked day after day. She cleaned houses that were not hers. She cooked food she wouldn't eat. She cared for other people's children, while still feeling like a child herself. Some employers were kind, others barely looked at her. A few treated her as if she were invisible, useful, but replaceable. She accepted it all in silence, because silence was something she knew how to survive. But even while her body worked, her mind wandered. Sometimes while scrubbing floors or folding laundry, she would remember things she had learned at school. A poem, a math rule, a word she once liked the sound of. These memories hurt, but they also reminded her that there had been a version of herself who wanted to learn. Years passed like that. She grew older, stronger, more tired. And then, one evening, something small happened. So small that most people would have ignored it. She was waiting in line at a market when she saw a sign on a wall, adult education classes, enrollment open. She stared at it longer than she meant to. Her first instinct was to laugh. That's not for me, she thought. School had made that clear. She imagined herself sitting in a classroom again, surrounded by people younger, smarter, better. She imagined the fear returning, the shame. She almost walked away. But then another thought appeared, one she hadn't allowed herself to have in years. What if it's different now? That question followed her home. It followed her to bed. It stayed with her for weeks. When she finally decided to enroll, her hands were shaking as she filled out the form. She felt ridiculous, too old, too broken, too far behind. On the first day of class, she almost didn't go in. She stood outside the building, heart racing, memories crashing into her all at once. The hallway, the laughter, the sentence that had destroyed her. Those who can't afford to study should stay at home. She closed her eyes and walked in anyway. The classroom was different from what she remembered. Smaller, quieter. The students were older. Some had gray hair. Others carried the same tired look she saw in the mirror every morning. No one laughed. No one whispered. For the first time, she wasn't the only one carrying a past. Learning was hard at first. Her hands cramped when she wrote. Her mind doubted itself constantly. Every mistake felt like proof that she didn't belong there. But something else happened too. The teacher spoke with patience. The students helped each other. No one mocked her for asking questions. Little by little, fear loosened its grip. She studied at night after long work days. Her eyes burned. Her body ached. But she kept going. Each completed assignment felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that had been stolen. There were days she cried over books, days she wanted to quit, days the old voice returned, whispering that she was pretending to be something she wasn't. And every time she answered it with action. She showed up. Weeks turned into months, months into years. The day she finished her studies, she held the certificate in her hands and cried, not because of the paper, but because of the girl she used to be. The 13-year-old who sat on a classroom floor, believing her life was already over. She wished she could go back in time and whisper something in that girl's ear. You were never stupid. You were never less. They were wrong. Education didn't erase her pain, but it changed the story she told herself about it. She wasn't a failure. She was a survivor. By the time I was old enough to understand my mother's story, she had already become someone people described with simple words. She's strong. She's hardworking. She's a good woman. What they didn't see was how much strength had been demanded of her before she ever had a choice. They didn't see the 13-year-old girl sitting on a cold classroom floor, humiliated and alone. They didn't hear the laughter that followed her for years. They didn't know the sentence that tried to define her future before it had even begun. But I see it. I see it every time she hesitates before speaking in a group. Every time she apologizes for things that aren't her fault. Every time she doubts herself, even when she's clearly capable. School didn't just fail my mother. It taught her that her voice was dangerous, that being seen could hurt, that existing in the wrong place, with the wrong background, could cost you everything, and yet somehow it didn't break her. When she became a mother, she made a silent promise to herself and to us. No one would ever humiliate her children the way she had been humiliated. She taught us dignity before words. She taught us effort by example. She didn't have fancy lessons or perfect grammar, but she had something rarer: awareness. She listened when we spoke. She believed us when we said we were hurting. She stood between us and the world when it tried to be cruel. Years later, we passed by that old school together. The building looked smaller than I remembered. The walls were chipped. The gate was still rusty. I asked her if she felt angry. She thought for a moment. No, she said. I feel free. That surprised me. She explained that anger had kept her tied to that place for too long. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing what happened. It was about refusing to let it define her forever. The people who laughed at her probably don't remember her name, but she remembers hers. She reclaimed it. Today when my mother speaks, I listen carefully, not because she's loud, but because every word she says was once almost silenced. This story isn't about school. It's about what happens when the world tries to convince a child that they are nothing, and that child survives anyway. It's about how humiliation can shape a life, but it doesn't get to decide its worth. And if this story reaches anyone who once felt small, invisible, or unwanted in a classroom, I hope they hear this. You were never the problem. You were never wrong for existing, and your story isn't over. My mother's life is proof of that.